Hello, church. Whose example are you following? Whose example are you following? I've been recently reading the first letter of Peter, and in that letter, he uses, in 1 and 2 Peter, he uses three Greek words that all mean example. I just want to pick on these words because I think they're very instructive for us for this particular devotional. So 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 21, Peter says this, to this you were called because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. And the Greek word he uses here is hupogrammos, which literally means to write under. And if you can imagine, like back to your school days, when a teacher would write some words out at the top of the page and get you to kind of copy them under, or maybe a parent would do that, mum, dad would write the words out, and then the child would actually copy the words underneath or trace over the words, teaching you to write. And this is the word that Peter uses here. And, you know, the thought here is that Christ has left us an example in his life, and part of that example, unfortunately, is his suffering. Now, as Pentecostal stroke charismatics, we can sometimes be accused of not having what you might say is a developed theology of suffering. In other words, we're all very great when it comes to the joy of the Lord, and we're training for reigning and this and that, you know, kind of what God is doing in us and through us, and very positive. And we emphasize those things, rightly so, I believe. We can have an overdeveloped theology of suffering, to be honest, but we can also have an underdeveloped understanding of the place of suffering in the Christian life. And Jesus suffered. He suffered, you know, obviously on the cross. He suffered physically. He suffered emotionally and spiritually. And we too, if we're truly following in his steps, the Bible makes it clear, you know, we will undergo a degree of suffering. And we can't get away from that because we are following. If we're truly followers of Christ, then we will follow in his steps, and we will have difficult times. You know, being a Christian is maybe the most, it's much more preferable to not being a Christian, let's face it. And it may be joyful and it may be a wonderful life, but it's not an easy life. It's not all kind of rosy in the Christian garden, you might say. So he has left us an example to follow, and part of that is that, you know, we will undergo difficult times. We will have times of affliction, times of difficulty, times of trouble. And that's all part and parcel of how God shapes us in our lives. In another part of his letters, he uses a similar Greek word, and we translate it example. But I'm actually looking at another place in the Bible where this word is used, James chapter 5, verse 10. And James writes this, brothers and sisters, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. So first and foremostly, we follow the example of Christ, but also we follow the example of others, godly people around us, godly people God puts into our lives, and the way that they deal with difficulty and adversity. And here James is writing to his readers, and he's saying, look at the prophets, how the prophets had to, you know, they prophesied. Sometimes it was difficult circumstances, and they maybe had to wait years for those prophecies to come to pass. And not all of them saw the fulfillment of those prophecies. And it'll be the same with us. We have to patiently endure. We have to patiently wait. We won't necessarily always see everything that we want to see. James writes this, see how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. So you too, be patient and stand firm. So we are to look at the people around us, the people that God has put across our path, see how they handle difficulty and adversity. And that's an example to us as well. And finally, in another part of his letter, he again uses another word, a very different word this time, which we translate as example or pattern. And it's used in 1 Timothy 4, verse 12. Paul writes this, don't let anyone look down on you, that's Timothy, because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith and in purity. And this Greek word, it talks about the impression of a heavy object making a mark on something, making an impression, an imprint. And so it's a challenge to us, isn't it? What kind of impression are we making on those people around us in the church and outside of the church? What kind of an example are we being in the way we handle difficulty? Oh, we can all handle good times well, can't we? But how do we handle conflict? How do we handle tension? How do we handle difficulty and adversity? And are we being a good example to others around us in the way we do that? So, whose example are you following? Follow the example of Christ, but also look to the example of others that God has put in your life. And finally, and importantly, be an example to other people. May God encourage you with this word today. Bless you.